Hello, and welcome to Episode 3 of Scholarly Snippets. I'm your host, Stephen Sorensen. Today, I am joined by a guest with a bachelor's degree in ancient history from Newcastle University, and he's also an admin of the Roman and Byzantine History Facebook group, which has over 20,000 members and growing, and it's allegedly one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Roman group forum on the internet. Charlie, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks today, Stephen. How about you?
I'm doing well also. So thanks for joining me. I'm really glad to have you here. What originally got you interested in history?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a number of factors. So where I live is a town called Colchester, which in Roman times was called Camula Dunum, which was the capital of Roman Britain. So with that amount of Roman history around me growing up, I couldn't really not be into history. But also when I was growing up as well, my parents didn't really read me fairy tales as such when I was a kid. It was more stories about King Arthur, Robin Hood, Julius Caesar, all these amazing historical figures. So I think a combination of all those different things sort of thrust me into history.
Right, yeah, you couldn't even escape it if you tried. so,
Definitely not.
yeah, you went and got your bachelor's in ancient history. How'd you go about choosing your school?
So I had a number of offers on the table from Durham, Edinburgh,
Hmm.
Exeter, and Newcastle, all fantastic universities. But when I went to visit Newcastle, the city itself felt like home. I think anyone who's ever been there know it's one of the friendliest places in the UK. Everyone wants to talk to you. Brilliant. Furthermore, you've got Hadrian's Wall just outside the city, which is this incredible source for Roman history. And I think as well, anyone that's been to Newcastle knows it's one of the cheapest places for buying pints as well, which is a big thing for a student.
Yeah, right. Cool. So yeah, it sounds like you had quite a few different offers, and the thing that helped you settle on Newcastle was the historical background, the community aspects, and the cheap beer, right?
100%.
Pretty much. So that's cool. How'd you go about choosing your major? I know you said you were always interested in history, but did you
Mm.
ever think about doing a different major? Or
Yeah, originally I actually had a number of offers on the table to study international relations. I wanted to go into politics when I was older, but at the last minute I rejected all the international relations offers for ancient history. So, a number of reasons for that as well. But the most important one was my classics teacher in year 13, Mr. Christmas, was one of the best teachers I've ever had. And he really instilled this absolute adoration of classics within me and my classmates as well. They gave us little Athena badges to wear around school, and it just felt like an elite club. And it was something that really made me want to continue it further.
yeah, that's cool. So when you started going to Newcastle, did you originally have your major set for history, or?
Yeah, so from day one, I was always doing ancient history. I took a couple of philosophy and archaeology modules as well, but it was always going to be ancient history that I graduated with.
Cool. So, in your experience going through school and getting your degree, what have been some of your favorite parts of doing that?
I think when I was at university, walking along Hadrian's Wall in part was this incredible surreal experience. We also did some really cool things in seminars where one of the best things was reenacting the trial of Socrates. Got to play the part of Socrates, which was really good fun.
Right.
Being the most obtuse, annoying man in the world, which is fantastic. Absolutely loved it. And writing my dissertation as well, researching a really unknown subject, especially for me.
It sounds like just about every part has been part of your favorite. Getting out in the field, spending time in the classroom, writing even your dissertation, which we're going to talk about here after this next question. What have been some challenges? I know everybody deals with challenges. They
Mm.
have different things. You know, people have financial problems, medical issues, maybe a death of a close friend or a family member. What have been some challenges that you've been faced with in your time pursuing a history education?
I think a big part of it is that obviously, unlike being an engineer or being a doctor, there isn't a clear career progression in history. And a lot of people have this idea that unless you do medicine or engineering, a vocational degree, it's going to be very difficult to find a job afterwards. And I think that's something that followed me around for a long time when I was talking about doing history. and actually doing it. I think another big challenge, especially within the degree itself, was I had to write an essay on the Iliad. So reading book 2, the catalogue of ships, was one of the biggest challenges in my degree. But that was one of the most boring afternoons of my life, trying to read just list the ships. It was mind numbing.
So what you're saying is one of the most challenging things is not even getting a job itself, but just the fear and the anxiety around that. Like kind of
Mm.
this idea that there's a chance that all of this is going to be for naught.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in the UK, where you're spending at least £27,000 to do a 3-year degree, it's definitely something that makes you think, what if I can't pay this back? Or what if I can't get something out of this? It's definitely a thought that
Right, and
went through my head a lot.
you want to get that money back too because it's an
Yeah,
investment and you want to
100%.
make some capital and leave things for your children if you ever have any, and or friends and
Mm.
family, whoever you decide to give your possessions to. So yeah, that's interesting. Did you end up ever getting a job in history or related to that?
Not in history, actually. I'm at the moment, I'm currently a recruiter.
A recruiter, for what?
Yeah. So I recruit. I do what's called executive search. So I recruit high-end contractors who are earning a lot of money, a lot more than I'll hope to earn.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. So, do you ever have plans to try and get a job related to history, or?
I think at the moment I'm at a fantastic company that I love and doing actually a job that uses a lot of my historical skills. Being able to actually understand people's motivations, be able
Hmm.
to communicate effectively. A lot of things I learned in history. I think at the moment I'm very settled. Maybe when I'm older, but unlikely, I think.
So that's interesting. Even though you have your degree in history and you don't have a job that's directly related to it, you're still finding it useful, right?
Mm, yeah, definitely. I think a lot of these humanities degrees that aren't necessarily vocational actually give you so many transferable skills to use in life.
Right, yeah. I guess that would have to come out of studying the humanities and what makes people people. So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. What would be your dream job if you could pick any job in the world? What would you be doing?
Cool. That's a difficult one. Um, I'd say probably go for being prime minister. I think that'd be a nice job.
Prime
Maybe not at
Minister.
the moment, but
Yeah, maybe in a few years down the road after all the virus stuff is blown over.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. All right, so on to your dissertation. You wrote your dissertation on the Huns and their portrayal in Roman sources. I found
Yeah.
this to be interesting. For people who aren't familiar with the Huns are typically considered to be nomadic warriors who terrorized Europe and the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. And they're best known for their astounding military achievements. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, yeah, very succinct.
So, your dissertation is on the Roman sources and their portrayal of the Huns. What types of
Mm.
sources do the Romans have that even mention the Huns?
Yeah, so the first one that mentions the Huns is Ammianus. He presents this really. It's very clear that he had never met a Hun in his life. He presents this really skewed view of them as these troglodytic people that don't build anything and just destroy, that have no culture of their own. And it's interesting, a lot of sources also follow this point of view. People that are generally considered to be more religious sources, like Jordanes, Justin, people like that, who sort of portray them as these armies of Satan. They feel like the end times are coming. They're the ones bringing down the Roman Empire. And I think it's Jordanes who says he's happy that his brother didn't survive to see the end of days brought by the Huns.
Hmm.
And yet you get this fantastic story in Priscus, who actually went and met Attila, where you see this difference, this incredible embassy. You see a great snapshot of Hunnic society and understand that actually they're not these illiterate barbarians. I mean, Attila appreciates the joke of a jester who mixes Latin and Greek and Hunnic all together. He shows incredible statesmanship and these incredible buildings as well that they have in their towns and cities that they own. I think there's definitely a lot of disagreeing factors in the sources.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think even today, some people hold a somewhat simplistic view of what a nomadic tribe is. Like, it's not just
Mm.
savages and barbarians riding around on horses. They do have culture. Like, they have their populations and their trends and customs that they maintain. You know, it's not just straight savagery. And it's interesting how some of the Greek and Roman sources, when they're talking about the out group, the people that aren't with them, they're like, these guys are just savages. They don't even
Mm.
they wear
They're
pants. It's
barbarians.
ridiculous. Stuff like that. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting. What else can you tell us about your dissertation?
Yeah, so for me, it was very much originally I was actually going to write it on follow very much the idea by Gibbon about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I was going to look at a number of different factors: climate change, migration, the Volkenwanderung, as the Germans call it, the migration of all the steppe tribes into Europe. I just found myself attracted to the Huns in a strange way. This tribe that was seemingly barbaric, but actually were they as bad as they seemed? For me, that was a huge part of it. This idea that using the archaeological remains, the breadth of sources that we have compared to what the Romans did, to actually take a more detracted stance and actually look at them for who they were, not what they did.
Yeah, that I think is really important, is to get into the as close to the primary sources we can get to kind of
Mm.
shape our view of the past. So I haven't seen this movie for a while, but you know the movie Mulan, the Disney movie. I,
Yeah.
if I remember properly, the Huns are portrayed in that, right?
Yes.
Are those the
Yeah.
Huns that they're fighting against? So yeah,
Yeah. They've
I
got
think for
an
the
amazing
most
song about it.
I think for the most part, that is what people's viewpoint on the Huns are going to be, because more
Mm.
people, I think, have watched Mulan than have dug into the ancient Roman sources of the Huns and the actual literature from the Huns themselves. I haven't personally dug into all that too in depth. So, do you know if the Huns themselves left much literature, or do
No, so the Huns themselves, much like the Mongols after them, the Scythians before them, they weren't a tribe. They weren't a group of people that, as far as we can tell, wrote things down. As far as we can tell, they actually preserved their information in didactic tradition, much like Homer did before when he didn't
Mhm.
write anything down. It was all passed through people's voices and poetry. And I think very much that their empire was so short-lived, 80 years thereabouts, that they didn't really get the chance to translate it down to people. So I don't think there's much left over in their own words. What is left, though, is the incredible craftsmanship of the items that they've left behind, the effects that they've had on the agricultural economies and the agricultural settlements in Hungary in particular, and also the lasting impact of being the force that really broke the back of the Roman army in the West.
I think it's kind of interesting how, and this isn't just for the Huns, but for a few different ancient cultures or medieval cultures, the only way that we know about them is through the writings of their opponents. And
Mm.
so we're kind of given this distorted view of who they were, and we kind of have to sift out the biases. So specifically for the Huns, we have to sift out the Roman biases and try and paint a picture of who they were based on this writing, but also the archaeological evidence that you were just talking about, the items that they left behind. And so it's interesting. Just I think some people may not be thinking about how do we even figure out like what's happened in the past. Like I was taking a course on Coursera, the online school thing that gives out free classes. I was taking the Magic in the Middle Ages class, and they were talking about how one of the main reasons that we know so much about the magic that was being practiced in the Middle Ages is that the church wrote about it and that they didn't want it to be around. They're like, we don't want this anymore. We want it to be gotten rid of. And ironically, they ended up preserving the knowledge because they wrote about how they didn't want to preserve it. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting how we get about to getting those sources. One other thing that just came up when you were talking about that, you were talking about how some of the authors were saying that it was kind of like they were thinking it was like the end times. Like they didn't want to see the
Mm.
end times of the Hun. So he was glad that his brother had died because he didn't have to suffer through that. Does that tie in with any, like, the Christian belief that the second coming is coming back? Or, because I guess it was Romans, so they weren't necessarily Christians. What was the religious influence there? Do you know?
Yeah, 100%. So by the time the Huns had come around, it was after the time of Constantine. Christianity was officially the Roman religion, and it's interesting how you see in the writings of some of the historians and religious figures at the time, they actually called them the armies of Gog and Magog, who in Bible mythos are the
They called
leaders
the
of.
Huns that?
Yeah, and in the Bible they're saying they're in the Book of Revelations, Gog and Magog are the leaders of Satan's armies.
Hmm.
So it's this fascinating idea that you've got these people that, let's be honest, would have looked completely alien to them with their Asiatic features that they would never have seen before, coming and being seemingly invincible to a Roman army that was largely undefeated before that time. And what they were seeing was the end of a established order that had been around for the best part of 1,000 years in the Roman Empire. So it's understandable why they saw it as the end times and this satanic army.
Yeah, right. When you put it that way, it makes a lot more sense. Just to help get some perspective on just how severe this was, how much did the Huns really bother the Romans? Like, how far did they get into their area, their territory?
Yeah, so it wasn't just the Western Roman Empire that we think of, based around Europe as well. They besieged Constantinople. They broke through, took most of France. Their empire essentially extended from, in actual terms of physical territory, they extended from Hungary right through to France. They invaded Italy. In terms of influence, there's writings about Attila that he had the Chinese Empire at the time actually paying him homage. He was getting paid unbelievable amounts of tribute from both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. And at one point, there's a story that goes around that the Emperor Honorius's sister actually offered herself in marriage to Attila because he was so powerful. You had incredibly powerful Roman nobles such as Orestes, who was the father of the last Western Roman emperor, actually fighting alongside Attila. And the Battle of Catalaunian Fields, where they actually beat Attila, was one of the biggest battles in Roman history. And it took a coalition of the Western Empire and the Goths to actually beat the Huns.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I don't know what the relation is here, but is there any relation between the Huns and Hungary? Or is that just a coincidence that their names are kind of similar? Do you know?
That's not something I ever came across in my reading, but that is actually very interesting. As far as I'm aware, that there isn't much of a relation beyond obviously the name sounding similar.
Yeah, right. So yeah, that's cool. So do you ever want to pursue a higher degree? Is that a thing that you want to do?
I think it's something I've been toying with, the idea of. I think it's something that I will do when I'm older, sort of coming towards the end of my time working, the start of my retirement, when I've got a lot of time in my hands. I think at the moment, especially once this current lockdown's over, I probably won't have much time to be pursuing any sort of aspirations of a higher degree. But always good to do something like that in later life, keep the brain active. Yeah, definitely something I'd love to do later.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of a common sentiment, like people want to do it, but just the time and the money just doesn't allow it to happen. So, yeah, that's cool. Would you pursue a further education in history? Or I know you've expressed some interest in politics. Would you possibly go down that road if you were to go back to school?
That is interesting as well. I think I'd probably keep to the Greeks actually. I've done quite a lot now on the Romans. So I think the Greeks would be an area that I'd want to try and specialize more in. Alexander the Great, Athens and Sparta, people I've learnt about in my degree, but didn't write my dissertation about.
Yeah, that's cool. So do you have let's talk about the Facebook group a little bit. What's that like being an admin of one of the biggest Roman group forums on the internet? Do you deal with a lot of like pseudoscience or like trolls coming in to like cause issues or?
Yeah, I think when I first joined the group, before I became an admin, we had a lot of that, and it was my friend Ben and I that actually came up with doing post approval in the group and doing much tighter monitoring. Like it's a case of something that big needs to be monitored, and So there is quite a tight control now on what gets posted. People who you're not allowed to join the group unless you answer certain questions, but it keeps it a scholarly atmosphere. It stops people coming in and, just posting random things. We don't mind people coming in and not knowing about history and wanting to read and learn and educate. That's brilliant. We love that stuff. And we love it when scholars come in and speak as well. But when people come in and are rude, or people come in that are not conducive to the atmosphere of the group. An example of that would be every year around the anniversary of the fall of Constantinople, we always have to be on high alert because there was always arguments between Greek nationalists and Turkish nationalists about the conquest of Constantinople. You always get a lot of nationalists from other countries as well, trying to spread certain dogma that we don't think is conducive to a scholarly attitude. So it presents a lot of challenges, but it's a fascinating forum.
And so by dogma, it's that stuff that is there's evidence to argue against it, or well, how would you go about even identifying what a dogmatic idea is compared to a informed idea?
I think some are very easy to tell. So an example of dogma would be, for that I've seen in my time, is that somebody went on a very incredibly inappropriate rant about Turkish people and the theft of Constantinople, and calling them barbarians, butchers, all that sort of thing. That's not what I consider a conducive scholarly debate.
I would agree with you on that, yeah.
But you do get some occurrences where it is quite hard to actually tell. So one that I've disagreed with my fellow admins is about the lost Roman legion that may or may not have turned up in China.
Right, yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's a debate that there isn't an awful lot of evidence. There is some, very circumstantial, but it's my personal belief that is a discussion that has some merit to it. So that's where the line becomes a bit blurred between what is supposition and dogma and what is actually potentially history.
And so there really are still some debates that are ongoing about what's happened in our past, even in the scholarly communities, as to how far the Romans had gotten and what they were doing, So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I just think it's great, the advent of the internet and social media, and a lot of people just use it to watch videos of cats and animals and stuff, and I'm guilty of that as well. I like a good cat video here and there, but I also use it a lot for studying too, and connecting with other people, such as what we're doing here. And it's added such a unique opportunity for poorer people. Like, in the past, you really had to be set up nice. Like, you had to have some luxuries and some finances to be able to pursue an education and to get a name for yourself. But nowadays, really, like, you can learn quite a bit and communicate with a lot of other people about it, even if you don't have a whole lot of money. All you have to do is just go down to the library, and you can get on their internet and their computers there and connect with people there. And so, yeah, I think it's great that what you're doing there and trying to keep it a scholarly atmosphere and making sure that everybody is getting along, not calling each other barbarians or brainwashed fools or anything like that. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Do you have any other plans or events related to history coming up?
Yeah, later this year, I'm going to go to Istanbul. So my parents live in Turkey. So it's always been a lifelong dream of mine to actually walk along the Theodosian walls and visit Constantine's tomb. So that's definitely something that I'm going to take some time out this year and actually go and do whilst I go visit my parents as well.
Yeah, that'll be sweet to see some of that. You got to take some pictures and post them for us.
100%.
So yeah, just one thing that I want to give everybody a chance to do is leave a message for people who are just starting to get interested in history, either be it for a hobby or for their career or their education. What is the message that you want to give to people who are just starting to get interested in historical studies?
Yeah, I'd say that, look, from my personal point of view, Winston Churchill once said those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it. For me, I know that I've got all the recipe for success in life because I've studied the most successful people in history, people like Alexander, Julius Caesar, Niccolo Machiavelli. Socrates, Plato, the most intelligent, incredible people. The secrets of the future are in the past, right? By studying history, you're setting yourself up to actually succeed in life. But I think on a less philosophical point, the best way to get into history, I find, is to actually learn about the local history around you, whether that be your little local village that's got a great war memorial, or you have a really interesting family story that you want to delve into a bit more deeply. History's there for everyone, and it doesn't have to be grand history like I've studied. Of great conflicts. It could be the history of your family. It could be the history of your little village. I think there's a place for everyone in history.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that kind of shatters that stereotype of historians just, dusting off old books and reading about things that happened hundreds of years ago. Like, history is always happening. Like, even right now, we've got, just between you and I, our history, we had about an hour or half an hour of technical difficulties, and, that could go down in a history book that, they were trying to really get these video software to work, and it wasn't working, but then it did, and here we are. So yeah, I think that was a great message to give to people. So thanks for sharing that. Just, everybody can get involved in history, in your local history, depending on where you're living, or even your genetic history of people who try and trace back their family lineage to as far back as possible. I'm having an interview with somebody who's from a family of historians, he says, and they've traced their lineage back to, I think, the 1300s is what he said. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him about that. And I think other people, I've traced my lineage back. I'm not sure how far because I haven't checked the books, but I think it was like 300 BC or something. To some general or sort from the web. I don't know how reliable all that information is, but I've got it written down in a book. I got to break that out for the next talk. But yeah, so do you have anything else that you'd like to quick talk about before we wrap this up?
I think from my side of things, it's I think we've covered quite a lot. I've spoken a lot about my dissertation. I think for me, it's definitely, I think they've definitely gone over most things that I'd like to talk about, actually.
Great. Yeah. I'm happy that I could help you talk about what you wanted to, and I'm glad that you were able to join me and that you were up for that. So thanks for joining me, Charlie. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise.
Next time.
It's been fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much.